All right, Democrats made waves yesterday, as you heard, with Senator Cory Booker suggesting he's willing to be kicked out of the Senate over his move to release confidential documents relating to Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh.
That is Spartacus-like.
Any senator, officer, or employee of the Senate who shall disclose the secret or confidential business or proceedings of the Senate, including the business and proceedings of the committees, subcommittees, and offices of the Senate, shall be liable, if a senator, to suffer expulsion from the body, and if an officer or employee to dismissal from the service of the Senate and to punishment or contempt. So I would correct the senator's statement. There is no rule. There is clearly a rule that applies.
Then apply the rule and bring the charges.
Mr. Chairman.
Around the time all that was going on, Senator Mazie Hirono tweeted screenshots of documents saying they contain information Republicans don't want Americans to see. And the Hawaii Democrat joins us now. Senator, it's good to see you again this morning. Did you
Senator Spartacus.
Was that your Spartacus moment, Senator?
No, I just went about using the document that was really relevant to the questions that I had regarding Judge Kavanaugh's attitude toward Native Hawaiians, and so I just used it.
And Senator, we learned later that the documents that Cory Booker was explaining were confidential and that he was just going to put his hide on the line to release actually had been cleared the night before, and he was free to distribute them at that hearing. Had your documents been cleared before you posted them to Twitter?
No. No, I didn't ask for clearance of my document before, during, or after I used it.
So do you feel like you either broke a rule in the Senate, a rule of that committee, or were you on good standing to post those?
I question the legitimacy of the designation of confidentiality. And I said, after I used the document, and I said, I defy anybody to conclude that this document should even be deemed confidential. By the way, the entire process of deeming thousands and thousands of documents confidential was made by this guy named Bill Burke. Who the hell is he? You know, he is a confidant of Kavanaugh, and he represents Judge Kuczynski. So I think the whole process was not even legitimate, and so I proceeded to use my document without asking for clearance.
Well, don't you think, Senator, though, respectfully, that as long as the rules are in place, they ought to be followed, and that there's a process if you wanted to go through the same way Cory Booker got his documents cleared before he posted them, that you should have done the same?
There was a process for designating these documents committee confidential, and that process was not followed at all. So we all acknowledge that, but you know, they're just trying to, as I say in Hawaii, cover their okoles at this point.
But do you think, Senator, that it's a dangerous precedent to violate that rule just on your own, to go out and say, you know what, I'm not going to recognize the confidentiality? What if it happens next time to you and to Democrats?
It was a dangerous precedent to allow thousands of documents to be hidden from the American public using a process that is not legitimate. If we could have come together as had been done in the past, then it would have been okay, but that's not what happened at all. So, you know, if they want to expel me because I haven't followed the so-called rule, then they should do that, but they're trying very hard now to, after the fact, say that my document have been cleared. You know what? There's only one person who would have asked that very specific document relating to Judge Kavanaugh's attitude about Native Hawaiians, and that person would have been me. And I certainly did not ask for clearance before, during, or after.
David Ignatius is with us.
Ask me another question.
All right, David Ignatius.
Yeah. Senator, I wanted to ask you whether you think Judge Kavanaugh's basic credibility has been wounded by information that's come out in some of these documents. It seems that in past hearings he denied that he'd been involved in the confirmation of Judge Pryor, for example, and there are documents that show he was involved. He denied he was involved in the case of somebody named Manuel Miranda, and the documents show that he was involved. Is that really hurting his credibility, do you think?
As far as I'm concerned, there are all these questions as to how forthcoming he was in his prior testimony in 2006. What I'm focused on, because I wasn't here then, I'm focused on his dissents, which show a pattern that he is very much against women's reproductive rights and cases. He definitely has a pattern, and I think it was a blinking red light. It doesn't matter to me that he never had a discussion now about the Mueller investigation, but it was a blinking red light when he wrote that a sitting president should not be subject to either criminal or civil proceedings. That is a huge red light to this president, who is all about protecting himself.
All right.
Just one quick question.
Oh, sure.
Senator, you can't see it, but we have a split screen up here with Cory Booker and Kirk Douglas. Do you see likenesses between
Oh,
them?
no.
Okay, Donnie.
Oh, let's not go there.
Exactly. Senator Mazie Hirono, thank you very much for being on this morning. Appreciate it. And still ahead on Morning Joe, we showed you that moment from Wednesday's hearing where Brett Kavanaugh struggled to answer whether he'd discuss Bob Mueller or the Russia probe with someone from a law firm linked to President Trump. Kavanaugh was asked about that again yesterday, and it took a long time to get an answer. That is next on Morning Joe.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.